Good hello, welcome back to using bone deformers inside of Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. Sorry to bail on you there. Last time, picking up exactly where we left off, we had animated this torso movement. And it's now time to apply all of the arms and legs to make it a full character movement. First step is to set up the beginning pose, shuffling these arms to where they're going to sit at the first frame of this new movement. Using the free transform tool, grab anywhere along the stick itself to twist and turn any bone around, whereas picking up at the root bone will allow you to shift and move the entire piece to a new position. First, we're going to be focusing on animating these arms. Do you remember this stick figure thing? This is a gesture base for what I'm after. So as the torso rises, the arms will fling back behind the head and then jut forwards in a... What are you talking about? What's going on? So, therefore, at the peak movement of the torso, move over to that keyframe and twist the arms so that they are facing up in the air. Also get a feel at this point to see how far an arm can bend before its vectors start to contort. Also, I have a mistake here. The arm is still underneath the head. Now on the last frame of the movement, pulling the arms back down into that, what are we talking about? Pose. There we go. Pay close attention to the second half of the movement. The arms, the amount that they're moving back forwards again, it's not enough. It's following along with the body. It's not exaggerated. A couple of things that can be done to fix this. Exaggerate the timing, pulling the arm movements themselves 1 or 2 frames beyond the rest of the body movement. Stretching the thrust movement out so their furthest backmost point happens after the rest of the torso has started moving forwards, and pulling the arms themselves even further back past the head. See, the shoulder is starting to clip outside of the torso artwork, so its root is going to need to be shifted inside a bit so it's all sitting nice and flush. So the arm artwork is going to be nudged forward in Z space by opening up its parameters with the plus symbol here in the timeline, going to position Z and bringing it 1 just micrometer forwards. That fixes the layering without breaking any of the hierarchy. Here, to exaggerate the arms even further, I'm going to pull it back to where the vectors have started to break, but it's not to the point of being stupid. The arms are moving so fast at this point that I get away with it, and it won't be noticeable to the viewer. There we go, that arm movement is getting pretty decent now. Remember to consider for yourself what timing feels appropriate to you. So there's still some frames that I'm hoping to stretch out or compact together. The flick down movement getting a bit snappier, other parts having a bit more time. Remember, the box next to each layer allows you to change its color across the timeline. I'm going to do this for both sets of legs so that they're easy to see amongst everything else, and I can collapse the body and all the arms layers, leaving the timeline mostly with the stuff that I'm wanting to focus on. Alright, now it's time to do the feet. These are going to have a couple of extra instant states to them. As he gains height, rather than jumping, he's simply going to be rising up onto his tippy toes with the enthusiasm of his arm thrust. The easiest way to do this for something as simple as a foot, rather than trying to deform and bend it and all that sort of stuff, we're going to have some new frames. So looking here at the top left of the timeline, there's this icon with an X through it. This is new drawing. It's going to put a slice in the timeline. It's going to give you a blank slate. Turn the onion skin on. Once again, it's the button below the transform tool. The original image will come in red, and now it's very easy to draw a new foot in over the top. Its toe being in the same spot, the rest of the foot rising up above it, of course. Before that, press the new drawing button again to create a single in between, because, you know, it's only one stroke, really, real easy to do, and filling that with the same color it has had previously. If it's not filling, have a look inside of tool properties under the paint bucket tool and see if the close gap is set to 0. Pop it to something around 2. That should work fine. Do the same thing for the other foot, so they both have 2 states. Have a look at my timeline there. You can see that the in-between state plays for 2 frames. Once that's done, both of these feet layers are going to need to be nested inside of a peg. So with each layer selected, press the Add Peg button, the orange arc thing at the top of the timeline layers panel. That will pop each of them inside their own peg layer. I'm making both of the foot peg layers a darker shade of blue, just so that they stand out just a bit more from the rest. Now you can do all of the tween animation with the peg and all of the artwork animation with the drawing layer. Theoretically, you could do the tween animation on the drawing layer as well. However, as you're moving the drawing frames around, this is going to be creating new and shifting other motion keys around. Frankly, it's a headache that we simply do not need to deal with by creating its own peg. A healthy habit to get into. Place some motion keys on the foot peg layers as the torso is reaching the uppermost point of its arc, just before and as it gets to that point. Because the body's moving with so much momentum, it's going to be fun to give the impression that the momentum is pulling his whole body forwards. So all these keys are going to represent, the first one is keeping the feet stationary, and the second one just nudge each foot a little bit to the right, as you can see here. With this done, the feet are complete and the torso is complete. So now all we need to do is connect the feet and the torso together with these here legs. So you're finally going to see why I built these legs upside down. It's root bone at the ankles working its way up to the hips. Also, the design of the character, remember, is wearing the long coat so that the legs simply hide behind the torso. This allows us to be a little bit rougher in our movement, and not having to be quite as precise is fantastic because, you know, the advantage of rig-based animation is supposed to be because it's time efficient. If it ever gets to a point where you're being so meticulous that you might as well be drawing it, then you might as well be drawing it. Before we start the leg animation, I want to remind you of the technique of pressing the keyframe button before making the movement itself. This is why. If I press the plus button on this leg layer here, you see it opens up and you can see the individual parameters. If I did not press the keyframe button first and I just started shifting parts around, do you see what's happening here? It's only adding keyframes to some of the parameters, not all of them. So having all of these keys out of whack with one another is going to distort the movement. Whereas you see if I press the add keyframe button on the master of the layer, it will add keys to every single parameter inside. This keeps the workflow safe from any weird surprises. So have a look at these first two frames of movement. The first one, the ankle stays put, but the torso is moving. On the following frame, the torso continues to move, but now the ankle shifts as well. So we have a challenge. The first frame, we need to keep the ankle still. So add the keyframe down all the bits, and all we're going to be doing is rotating it, so the hip stays stuck to the inside of the torso. That's pretty straightforward. Now on the next frame, create another key down everything, and the first thing you want to do is grab the ankle root, move it over the foot so that is moving accordingly. Bend the knee and the rest of the limb so it stays once again inside the hip. So yes, we may be working frame by frame at this level, but we're still only shifting things around. It's not redrawing anything, so it's still very fast to do. And because different elements are moving at different speeds and we need to make this leg connect seamlessly with both of them, being careful on the way through is definitely the right way to go. If we try to motion tween too much of this in one go, we're going to lose more time than we gain going back and trying to fix all the kinks that will appear. Same thing again on this next one. The ankle stays still, but the torso moves. Shift the hip up, all good. So same action again, the foot now reaches its uppermost point, so move the ankle to the new position, but now we reach a problem. The torso is too far away for the leg to reach. What can we do? Well, if you pick up on the knee rather than on the bone itself, this allows you to stretch the artwork out. So you can pull on the knee and pull on the hip. And don't worry about this being unrealistic. This is a cartoon, remember? It's not only okay for it to stretch a bit, but it's good for it to stretch a bit. Exaggerated movements give things more life, more excitement, more good. And now that the foot is at its highest point, we know that it's not going to be moving now until a bit later on. So the only piece of movement we need to worry about for several frames is the movement of the torso. This is great because we don't have to work frame by frame anymore. We can skip several frames ahead, put our next set of keys down at the beginning of the foot movement, and simply stretch the leg up to fit inside of the torso. I'm going to overextend the knee bend ever so slightly to give it that little bit more spring. Remember to keep in mind how much the knee should be bending or straightened as the torso moves up and down. So our next challenge is the conclusion of the foot move. New set of keys goes in there. Move the ankle across so it will line up with that foot. There we go. So we're starting to get the hang of this now. The torso is going to start moving down again. So recompress that knee and hip so it will start to restore itself. Finally, after the foot moves, there is only one frame of torso movement left. So we pop that in and there we go. That first leg is done for now. We will come back to it and smooth it out in a bit, but for now we've got a bit of momentum going, so let's go sort out the second leg. Speeding this one up a tad, if you're following along, try and do this one on your own. It's exactly the same process as the first, not really any differences at all. Okay, that's all done and dusted. However, because we were working frame by frame for so much of it, we need to be careful that things weren't appearing jittery. And as you can see, things are indeed a little bit jittery. This is easily solved. Turn on the onion skin tool once again. I've got the bracket set up to show a few frames either side, so we can get a feel for the overall movement of the leg itself. So I'm going through a few of these frames, readjusting the knee, readjusting some of the angles so that it will sit nicely between the red and the green shadows. If it's falling too far to one side, then it's probably going to be jittery, unless it's, you know, an extreme frame. So gauge for yourself, go through it and see where it might just pop out for one frame and go back in again. Smooth those out. Little thing for fun, I'm going to put in a bit of head movement. Very easy to do, just going to pop a keyframe in at the closed peg layer for the head, so it puts one in for everything inside the hierarchy. Going to work my way through the uppermost layer in the head hierarchy, rotating it accordingly. So I'm going to tilt it forwards when the body is at its lowest arc down. And one frame after the torso starts to move back forwards, after it goes all the way back, I'm going to pull the head back to its furthermost point, so it's looking forwards. And actually I'm going to leave it there because the head will tilt forward naturally as it's connected to the neck. And it brings it forward just enough for the character to be facing forwards a bit more, which is what I want. So now that that's done, I have put bones down the down the actual nose head thing itself. So I might as well make use of those. Putting a keyframe on each of the individual bones, I'm going to shift them across just a little bit each when the head is at its lowest most point to make it seem like this thing flops forwards just a tad. If I select all of the keyframes aside from the top one and shift the exposure forwards by one, this will create a good flop motion as each bone concludes its movement one frame after the other. It's good for tails and whippy things and stuff like that. If I take the first initial keyframes, copy and paste those after the fact, and do the same shifty forwards thing, I'm able to get a whip back when the head moves backwards again. As before, the exposure of which can be easily shifted about and experimented with until it gets right. The best result I found in the end was to make it pretty close actually. The final tweak I want to make is something to give the overall figure just that little bit more oomph to its movement. This is an extremely subtle one, like so subtle that you're not supposed to see it as a feature. If I push this too far, then it's too much. On the master peg of the entire character, I'm going to place these new keyframes down one frame either side of the movement of the shifting feet. So it's 5 frames long. Right in the middle of these frames, I'm going to place one more key. The ones on either side, they're going to stay as is. They're a neutral resting position. The one in the middle is where there's going to be a tiny spring. I'm going to take the free transform tool, nudge its position up a tiny bit. Can you see that? To conclude the movement, a very subtle bit of squash and stretch. Another few frames after the conclusion, adding in this extra keyframe, which is going to be yet another neutral resting pose. And in between that, just as before, another keyframe. This is going to be where the squash happens. Notice the pivot point in the lower center position of the master peg with the free transform tool selected and moving it from one of the top corner transform spots. I can stretch the character up and down from the middle. I'm going to pull it down and out the tiniest bit. I have to be very careful not to overdo this. Look at this. So that's still too much because it looks free transformed. It looks stretched. That's bad. So I'm going to make it even less. Pull it back into the middle, but pull it down in the center like 1 pixel. And there we go. I'm pretty happy with that now. Just gives that tiny bit more move back into neutral after his hands have gone out. I feel like it adds quite a lot for something that's, if you're not keeping an eye out for it, would be completely invisible. And there we go. That brings us to the end of making this gesture with nose bones. I hope you learned something and it wasn't too just blah of information. We covered a lot of ground, from software features to just technique. The point of these techniques is to be time efficient, still get decent results, and is appropriate for entry-level animators who are doing bone animation for the first time. Stick to these techniques, practice with them as much as you can, and over time you might find yourself being able to experiment or push certain boundaries into other directions. Every character shape is a little bit different, so keep that in mind. Different ways you might need to approach things depending on what your goal is. But not being afraid to take certain risks and experiment outside your comfort zone is one of the best ways to learn. Thank you for joining me with Nose Bones once again. Hopefully we might see him again sometime in the future. Have some fun, and I'll see you in the next one.